And hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're sitting down with a brand new guest. Her name is Felicia Murrell. She has written an incredible book called The Restorative Power of Love in an Either Or World. It is so good. And so, Felicia, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have time with you.
Glenn, thank you so much for having me on. I am looking forward to our time together today.
Thank you. So the book is an incredible read. I've already told you before we hit record. I've emailed you. I've told everybody about it. It's on a short list of books that I actually want to reread over the summer because I want to spend a little bit more time with the material. So I thought maybe we could just begin by talking about the title of the book. And then, as I mentioned to you, I have like 10,000 sticky notes marking various pages with ideas that jumped out at me. So maybe we can go through a couple of those. But first, the title and in an either or world. Can you take us into the title, the book? What's it about? Who's it for? What can readers expect? Wade us into these waters a little bit.
Yeah, I love that so much. I originally thought the title would be like "And the Thread of Love"
Mm.
because I think like "and" is this kind of like the thread that stitches us and weaves us together. And so thankfully I have publishers who were like, let's think of a title that really encapsulates the book. And so this title came from Whitaker House and The Restorative Power of Love. And when I heard it, I felt like, yes. Um, the book itself is kind of a hybrid genre. There's poetry, there's essays, there are some think pieces inside of it. And inside of that, I wanted to also capsulate the weaving of our diversity, that we're neither all one thing or the other. So I hope that there's some kind of model between the white spaces of that. Um, and I think the book is for those who are questioning and wondering, how do I show up in the world actively, passionately engaged, and also do that from a foundation of love, from a foundation of wholeness and kinship, and not polarities and dualities.
Yeah, last night I was walking with my daughter. We went for a walk after dinner, and she's 7. She's going to be 8 later this month. And she said to me, What do you do all day when I'm at school?" And so I said, "Well, I said, I work on my podcast stuff, and I do some, other things that she knows that I have other jobs and stuff." And she said, "Well, what'd you do for your podcast?" So while I was reading through a book, I said, "Of somebody I'm talking to tomorrow." And she said, "What's the person's name?" So I said, "Well, her name is Felicia, and she wrote a book." She said, "What's it called?" I said, "It's called And she goes, "That's a weird title." And I said, "It is, right?" I said, "But," I said, the rest of the title is, it talks about like living in an either or world and instead living with an and mindset." She goes, "Well, what's that mean?" I said, "Well," I said, you think about think about school, right? We have a lot of times you have certain, like, you have friends and you have the little group of friends, and some friends might say they don't like those other people, so you're either with us or you're with them. And I said it's either or. I said, so the idea of Felicia's book is that, what if we approach life with an and mindset, where it's all of us, it's us and it's them, and it's all of us together as one? And she goes, "Yeah, that sounds like a much better world to live in." And I'm like, "It does, doesn't it?" And so even she was like so struck by the title, and I thought, I just love the title because I've told people about this book. I'm like, "I gotta get this book. It's called And I just leave it at that." And then they're like, "What's that mean?" I said, "Well, there's a subtitle as well." And then it opens up some interesting conversations with people.
Out of the mouth of babes, for
That's right.
sure.
That's right. So we talked about it in our email exchange, and I'm going to sound like a broken record to listeners who listen to the show all the time, but I wanted to share a little bit of my story with you, and then maybe you could respond to it and bring some clarity or some perspective. But I'm in this space where I'm realizing that I lived with an either or mindset for like a long, long time. As a staunch conservative evangelical for a good 25 years of my life, I was the poster child for all the different things. And then also as my life as a progressive, forward-thinking Christian for the last 8 or so years. And on both sides, I came to realize that the energy for me was the same. Like, we're the real Christians. We have the best understanding of Jesus. We have the best understanding of the Bible. We vote for the best candidates. We stand for the best policies. we advocate for the best things, and we have to take a stand against those people over there, because those people are bad. They're trying to take over. They're trying to destroy the world. We have to defeat them. And if you don't like it, you can unfriend me on social media. I can't tell you how many times I've said that on both sides of the spectrum. And on both sides, looking back, like I was just as judgmental, just as shaming. On the right, I shamed the left, and the left, I shamed the right. And then last summer, when we got into the heat of the election season and things were really at a boiling point, I had this thought that just really wrecked me and just sent me on what is really feeling like a very lonely journey where not many people are traveling these days. But I thought to myself, like I'm literally becoming the very same energy that I wanted to leave behind when I left the evangelical world. Because even back then I was tired of the fighting and tired of the shaming and tired of, othering everybody else. And I wanted to leave that behind. And I looked at my social media posts, I looked at all of the progressive material that I was sharing, and I was like, man, this is like the same energy that I grew up with. It's just being directed in a different place. And so that set me like on this mission to search for people, people like you who are modeling what it's like and what it could look like to have our values, to have our beliefs, but to hold them differently, with less judgment, less shame. What does it look like to see the humanity of all people? What's it look like to is it possible to move forward with people locked arm in arm, even if we don't see things eye to eye? And so, even though no one has all the answers, and this is far from an easy topic to address, your book and your work is just really giving me a tremendous amount of hope and so much to think about. And so, I was wondering, in sharing that story with you, and I know a lot of our listeners have reached out to me and said, like, I'm in a similar place where I'm having all these thoughts that I'm like exhausted of all the divisiveness and I just don't know what to do with it. Can you speak to that and share some wisdom and some perspective with us?
Yeah, first, just let me thank you for your trust and for sharing your story with me. That means so much to me. And even as I was listening to you, the thing that comes to mind is this place that I hold in my heart of there by the grace of God go I. And what I mean by that is I also was that person,
Mm,
right? Like I understand that Protestants protest. So the energy that's there with the Protestant, even in our unconscious, that we don't understand that we are being grafted into is this energy of protest. Um, Fundamentalists carry an energy that's kind of rigid and law-abiding and contained in these boundaries, right? This is an energy. I love that you use the word energy because these are energies.
mhm,
And Eugene Peterson, in the Message translation of Ephesians 1, he has this little line that says, all these energies reside in Christ, which is a whole nother thing.
mhm,
But I think energies are important. And so many times what happens is we live from the neck up, we live in our heads, and all we do is ride the waves of our thoughts, of our emotions, of our habits, of our fixations, of our the surface level awareness of consciousness, right?
mhm,
And inside of that, when we have this energy storming in us that we are unconscious of, but that we have totally been indoctrinated and conditioned and influenced and formed by, even if I move from point A to point B, I take the energy of that with me. And so now, instead of being a fundamentalist conservative, I become a fundamentalist progressive, right?
mhm.
Um, or, I become a protesting progressive.
Right.
I take this same energy, is what I'm saying. Okay, so how do we alter the energies so that the energy shifts and change? That process for me, I totally believe in diversity. And so what works for me may not work for you because you're not me. We're not the same. But the invitation remains the same. And that's the journey of love that I think we're all being invited into when we move from our head, that the 18 inches, however more it is, from our head to our heart. And we start integrating. It's not either or, the fragment and cutting off. It's the and, right? So we have our head and our heart, and now our heart is involved in this. And we move from our heart into our gut, which in the narrative it said that, Jesus was moved with compassions, which is his bowels, right? I'm touching my stomach area, the bowels. That's that seat of inner knower or our intuition. And so now, when we're not just surfing the waves of our head, but we're also open heart, where our heart is saying, there's got to be more, there's got to be different, there's got to be a different type of energy that brings us to connection, that gets us what we're looking for without the fighting and the parsing and the fragmenting and the dualities, right? So my heart opens up and my gut knows this. And in my bowels, I'm moved with compassion. My inner knower is like, okay. And so for me, I sink down out of my head into my heart, into my gut. I'm getting quiet enough to open the space to hear something that's there all along. It's been
Mm,
there. Um, it created the cosmos, and that's love and love's energy, right? And so the energy of love, which is the source of our being, the ground of our being, there's a song within each of us that if we get quiet enough, we hear love's energy singing our song. And that song is a song of connection. It's a song of kinship. It's a song of um, really a welcoming. It's a belonging song. It's inclusive. And we don't get to that song by Audre Lorde would said, you don't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. And really what I see with a lot of the cattiness or the back and forth or the demands to take a side. This is the master's tools. The
mm,
master's tools is control, it's demand, it's expectation, it's fight for my right, it's subjugation, it's, you know, my way is right, it's the power. All of these things are the master's tools.
mm,
These are tools that actually create the chasm and create more distance and more disconnection than connection. And so when I move out of the surface level, when, my heart starts softening enough and my insides start getting quiet enough for me to really hear love's energy thrumming through me, love reminds me of who I already am and what has been before the foundation of the world. And then you get to the place where you're like, there has to be something different here. I'm just repeating more of the same. What's the invitation and the opportunity before us? And I believe that is the restorative power of love.
mm. Yeah, the way I was, brought up in the church, thinking about the gospel was, and salvation is, you're saved from hell, so you believe the right things and you say the special prayer, you try to live a decent life, but, at the end of the day, you believe the right thing, so you're going to go to heaven, when you die. And that was salvation. And then, when my daughter was born, I started to ask a lot of questions, started to, deconstruct. And, I remember I tell the story all the time, but she was rushed to the NICU after she was born. And I put my hand in the tank, and everybody's moving around. There's wires all over the place and tubes. And they said, "Put your hands in the tank." I put my hand in the tank, and she touched my finger, and my theology just fell apart because I'm like, how in the world can this child be sinful and evil and destined for hell unless she believes the right things? And how does that make God a good father? This doesn't make any sense. Like this whole gospel thing doesn't make any sense anymore. And so I went down this path to explore, different ways of understanding Jesus and the Jesus story. And I feel like the place I've landed, and I talk to my daughter about this all the time because she asks questions about God and all the books on my shelf and what I used to do in school and stuff. And I said where I'm at now with this Jesus guy, I said I feel like all of us were born with this breath of God in us. We're all born these loving, creative people. I said, but we live our lives and we forget that. Like stuff happened, we have experiences, it gets covered up, the flame gets dimmed a little bit and we forget. And I said, I think that Jesus is like God's mirror to the world saying, this is who you are. Remember, this is who you are. This is who I've created you to be. You and this guy are no different. This is who you are. And I said, I think salvation is when we wake up and we remember, oh yeah, that's who I am. And the way I've been living isn't really working. It's not working to make the world the kind of place that God wants it to be. And so I said, we choose to follow Jesus and we follow his way. And I said, when he was on the cross, they put him on the cross and they killed him. But he said, I love you and I forgive you. And that power, the power of that love brought him back to life 3 days later. I said, that's the story. And so I have these conversations with my daughter, and I feel like that's how I'm understanding the gospel these days, is like you said, and it's about waking up and remembering that love that is a flame within all of us. And I think that if we can see that flame, what I've learned from your book is if I can see that flame even burning in the slightest little bit in the person I dislike the most, that can do something that can change the energy of the atmosphere even just a little bit.
Yeah. I have a friend who always says that whatever our theories and ideas and thoughts are, we should try to tell them to a 7 or 8 year old child. And if they can understand it and get it, then it is simple enough to be conveyed.
Yeah,
And I love that you were able to explain that to your daughter in that way. Father Thomas Keating, who is one of the co-founders of Centering Prayer, which is a contemplative prayer practice, he said that salvation is the journey of removing the junk from our lives.
that's right.
And he says it's a lifelong journey. Um, the most important journey we will ever take is the spiritual journey of union. And it's not that union is something we ascribe to or a destination we reach to. It is indeed a journey. Um, and that the softening of ourselves and that union on the other side of that is the unloading of our unconscious.
Mm,
And think about even, all of the unconscious ways, particularly those of us that were formed in the Christian faith tradition. And I imagine that people of other wisdom traditions could say the same, but that we internalized other people's interpretation of the Bible,
mhm.
that we unconsciously have just mirrored, or I use the word catfish because I'm from the South and catfish are, they just eat everything. Um, but the way we swallow other people's faith walks and make it our own without critical analysis, without um, the communing with the divine for ourselves. And when we start to do this idea of deconstructing or whatever it's called, I think it's just part of our own spiritual journey. One of the things I know for me that was really significant, I was raised Pentecostal,
Mhm.
and so my language with God is going to be a lot of God said because inside of that, you're taught how to really like have this intimacy with spirit.
Yeah.
But inside of that framework, when I was still very much steeped in it, I remember having this moment of listening to this famous preacher. And as I'm listening to it, I felt like Spirit said to me, do you believe that? And it's really important for my own formation, but do you believe that? And I heard it. When I say heard, I don't mean audible. I just like sensed it in my inner being, and it gave me pause. But I dismissed it and I kept watching. And later I felt like Spirit came back again and said, do you believe that? And it caused me to say, well, do you believe that? Like, Spirit is asking me, do I believe this man whom I've watched for years and, parroted and all the things, right? And so um Spirit says, I believe, um, Spirit said, um, he believes essentially, it's been so many years now, it's been about 13, but essentially he believes that to be true to him where he is on the journey right now. right?
Right.
And it was too big of a statement than I even knew what to do with at the time. And I said, huh. And I actually, but it did something on my inside. It disturbed my energy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
To the point that I closed my laptop, cut the video off, closed my laptop, and I took a walk in the neighborhood. And as I'm on this walk, I needed to move the energy through me, move the idea through me, I didn't know what to do with what I had just heard. And as I'm walking, I felt spirit invite me. And the invitation was, Felicia, I need you to hand to me everything you believe to be true about God and let me sift it. And I will hand back to you what is truth, right? And I said yes to that, thinking this is one-time invitation. That sounds really cool.
So I'll be done.
I did not know that it would be the unraveling of every single thing
I've
for me,
arrived,
right?
right?
Oh my gosh, what a journey it's been. But it led me to the bottom of myself. And in the bottom, what I found was union, that I have always been grafted in the divine. The divine has always been grafted in me, and not just in me, but in you and other humans and the plants and the animals and all matter and the cosmos and the universe. Everything is sustained by, through, and with love. And that's our beginning, that's our origin. And all the other crap that's hitting the fan is people's junk, the place of their fixations, habits, investments, all the things that they are not yet at the place in their own journey where they can say yes to love, to the softening, to the transformation, to the change. And the more that they are scared and afraid, they grip and hold and demand power, demand certainty, demand things be my way. And this is true regardless of the labels or the binaries. I think the labels actually, in a lot of ways, are destroying our sense of oneness. Because what happens is the lie of separation displaces the truth of our being, which is union, that we all come from and are part of the same source.
So good, and it's so hard. I mean, I was thinking about this morning that it's almost like I feel like my mind sometimes is almost like the bouncer at a nightclub, like the protecting everything behind those doors that like is how I see the world. This is how we've come to see the world. It is separate. There are different people with different beliefs and different sides and different teams and different groups and all these different things. And this idea of that has risen up inside of me that, well, maybe there's another way to see this. Maybe it is about and not either or. It's like the bouncer can be so quick that it's like the ego inside can be so quick to say, nope, that's not how it works. This is how we've been raised to understand it. It's always worked this way. This is the way that it is. And the whole I think the whole point of life is being able to open ourselves up to the possibility that maybe there's other ways to understand and other ways to approach the world. And that doesn't mean that, just because I open myself up to understand the perspective of another, doesn't mean that my values are going to change. It doesn't mean that I'm going to change my beliefs or that I'm becoming wishy-washy or I'm losing my spine, so to speak. But it just means that I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to realize that just as I have a story that helped me come to my beliefs, someone else has a story that helped them come to their beliefs. And if we can understand the story of one another, it does, again, it goes back to that changing the energy of the atmosphere around us. And I think for me,
Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
Yeah. I I am Christian largely because I grew up in the South
Mhm.
and it's the Bible Belt, right? And most people in the South are churched, and you go to a Christian church of many different denominations. There's one or two or three on every single corner, plus one tucked in between. There's
I
just
live in
church.
North Carolina. They're everywhere.
And 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 I'm from North Carolina. So there you go.
There you go.
And um, but if I were to say have grown up in um a Muslim country or Asian country, I would more likely be um Buddhist or Hindu. I would more likely be something else based on geographical location, right? So I think when we're talking about stories, I go back to the natural world as my mirror. And I think about fish and birds and trees. We call them a tree. There's so many different varieties of it, right? And I think part of learning to live in the tension of diversity is getting to the point where we realize that acceptance does not mean that I'm okay with something. Just because I accept it, it is as it is. It is what it is. It is different from me. It has a different expression than me. Doesn't have to mean that I'm okay with it. It just means that it is. And I get to live one life, and that life is mine. It is not yours. It is not someone else's. I cannot tell someone else what to feel, how to think, what to do, because I'm not in their skin. The journey of my life is to radiate the expression of love's light and love's energy through me. And that's a big job. And so if I stay in my lane and focus on what love is inviting me to do, how is love inviting me to live and move and have my being in the world, all things considering, what's the most loving thing that I can do right now? But somehow in our world, we have bought into the lie that we can control other people,
Mm,
right? And this is largely in my belief system, I believe it comes from a misinterpretation of Genesis where we believe that we're to um, take the world and subdue it, that we're to dominate it and control it. And we believe the lie that we can control other people.
mm,
And so, what that means is when we look at the world through a framework of the knowledge of good and evil, which is dualistic, um, we have to become judge and jury, and we decide what's good, what's evil, who's right, who's wrong, and we split these poles that move us into us versus them. And once I have decided that I have the moralistic high ground, then I want everything to come in line with what I think is right. And the reality is, I was having this conversation with a friend the other day about civil disobedience. Sometimes love may invite us to participate in something that we would consider wrong
mm,
for the right reasons, right? And so I think when we take away the binaries and we really learn to drop down from the noise of our head into our hearts and our gut and listen in the quiet.
mm,
Silent and listen are the same letters that form these two words, right? When we listen and we are present enough with ourselves and with the energy of love to see what is the most loving response right now, that's what we say yes to,
yeah.
right? Whatever that looks like. And we're not like, oh, that's good and that's bad. That just is. This is what love's response. And if that response is civil disobedience, if that response is, to join the hurting, to be with those in acts of solidarity, to cross the border, whatever that is, I don't have that made up in my mind. I am being present with love to hear love's yes in this moment.
Mm,
And then I act, I move, I be.
yeah. Do you mind if I read something from your book for our listeners?
Feel free, absolutely.
So you have this, like you said earlier, the book is a collection of essays and poems and different things. And there's this one poem early on that I sat with this for a few days, and it brought me to tears a couple of times because it's so powerful. But you say pain demands that we pick a side, but we don't have to. We can choose to side with love, and love sees fully. Love is inclusive of both the victim and the perpetrator. In our black and white, right or wrong, polarized society, we demand allegiances and then we castigate or accept others based on their loyalty to their ideals instead of loving them for their humanity. We all have the potential within us to do depraved things. It doesn't mean our depraved actions define us. And that just, I mean, like I said, that just wrecked me because it's like you said, if we can move past those binaries of right or wrong or good or bad or holy or unholy or Christian, non, whatever it is, if we can move past that and we can see something deeper and live our lives from that deeper place, we open ourselves up to so many different possibilities of how to move forward. But it is so hard because so many of us, especially those of us who were raised in the church, um, especially in more conservative places, we're so used to rallying together by rallying against something, right? Like for me, it was all about rallying against the devil, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been involved, and I'm sure you've been involved in these things too, exorcisms and, different things where you're anointed with oil and you're praying against the demons. And like there was something intoxicating about being in a room filled with people who are for the same things you are and against the same one that you're against. And when then, I went to Bible college and seminary and I got trained in like how to bring people together to rally against these things. And like that's all I know is to rally against. And so, like you said earlier, when you move from one side to the other, you bring that same energy with you. And so it was only natural for me to go over to the left, and now I've got a whole different enemy. And now we're going to fight against the other side. And again, like there was something intoxicating about rallying together with these people who are passionate for LGBTQ people. They're passionate for Black Lives Matter. They're passionate for all these different things and going against that enemy over there. And now, like, I'm like you said earlier about listening to that voice inside, that says, "Do you really believe that?" And I feel like that's where I'm at now is like, do you really believe that's the best way to be? And I fought that voice a lot because well, of course it has to be. What am I supposed to do? But now I feel like I've been, not brave isn't the right word, but I feel like maybe I've come to the place where like nothing else is working. So I feel like I have to open myself up to it. So well, maybe I don't believe it. And now there's like a floodgate of thoughts that are coming.
Yeah. I think so much of our internalized beliefs when we've been raised in the Christian faith are about this Almighty God. And so we're looking at a God of might and a God of power and even if we don't articulate it, we're used to God forcing. And I have this vivid memory of um really needing to know what God felt about homosexuality. I knew what the Bible, what language was there
Mhm.
when you don't understand context and interpretations and those kinds of
What it
things.
says, right?
Yeah, what only what it says, literally,
Right.
not with any understanding of backdrop or
Very black and
context
white,
or social
right?
location or any of that. Um, I knew that. And I knew all these other things and the writings and all of that. I had this thing in my head. And so I was really demanding of God um to tell me what I needed to know for certain. At this point, I'm still holding on to these pillars of certainty, which certainty for me was safety. I felt grounded in it, right? Um, and again, I'm on a walk one day, and I really feel like Spirit said to me, um, Jesus is more for someone than he is against them. And people matter more than credo. And this, I never even heard this real language used, credo. So I go grab my phone, pull up Webster's dictionary, type what I think is spelled like. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay. So Jesus is more for someone than he is against them. Jesus is more for people than credo, our beliefs, what we think, all of this. And I realized that even in my relationship with the divine, I was demanding something of God, right? And expectations are a demand for control because we want someone else to perform in a way that we desire or that we want them to, right? And and so I was demanding this. And full stop, when I got to people matter, when I got to Jesus is more for something than against, that reordered everything for me. And what I realize is that people keep trying to invite other people into an argument or into a debate, largely because our Christianity has been rooted in apologetics. I'm not interested in debating, right? I go back to, um, you know, Jesus said not a word. He didn't defend a position, and he doesn't need us to defend a position, right? He said not a word. Um, 7 years ago, Van Jones asked Oprah if she had 10 minutes to speak to President Trump, billionaire to billionaire, megastar to megastar, human being to human being, what would she say to him? And Oprah, the video of it is out there because it's all her body language and in the way only a Black woman really can. She said, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I only speak where I feel I can be heard.
Mm,
And I think so much of what we're doing in social media spaces is just lobbing our voices out there, but we're not speaking in places where we can be heard. Because where we can be heard goes back to relationship, right? And so, and it's not that like, oh, I met you one time or oh, we're Facebook friends kind of relationship. I'm talking about the relationship that has the depth of relational capacity to be able to sustain the weight of what I'm trying to say to you, to be able
mm,
to sustain the weight of wisdom. And that only comes from love and trust and intimacy into me, you see, you know. And so part of the change of the energy from the demands of you say what I want you to say. You act the way I want you to act is realizing we're not separate, but this is a journey that really you do have to do inside of your relationship with love that brings you to the place where you can even hold the wisdom that there might be a way forward that's different from the force and the might and the punch and the power and the take a stand and the flip a table and the, the kind
yep,
of thing.
yep,
Um, Having said that, I'm a mama bear.
mm,
And so when I talk about love, people immediately think doormat, um, you know, all of those things. And you only have to watch a mama bear to know that love is furious and it is, protective and it will go to bat for its cub.
mm.
So it's not weak and nimble either.
Yeah, I think it's, what I've been trying to craft it in my own mind and just way I've been trying to, I guess, process it is that it's not about not being angry. It's not about not being upset. It's not about not being riled up, whatever word you want to use. It's about being mindful of how, again, we hold that energy, when we wield that energy. Not every moment, not every conversation requires my fierce anger to come through. Not every Facebook post or every comment thread needs that. That is a powerful emotion and it needs to be reserved for those powerful moments where it needs to be released. And I think, I wrote this down before, but you had said that, we often want people to perform like we do. We think that that's the way it should be. And for me, like for a long time, and I still, I mean, to this day, I wanted Jesus to perform like me. And so on both sides of the spectrum, left and right, one of my go-to verses was always the story of Jesus flipping over the tables, and I can't tell you how many times on the right and especially on the left, I said, it's time to flip over some tables, because that's what Jesus did. And again, going back to that voice, because I grew up as well as in the God said kind of spectrum, so I'll use that with you. But I felt like there was a voice inside, whether it's my intuition, God, whatever. Like, do you really believe that still? Like today? And I was like, well, yeah, it's right there in the Bible. It says this is a story, Of course it is. Jesus did it. How could it be a bad thing? And And the voice said, go back and read the story. And it's on all four gospels, so I read the story again and again and again. And I felt like the voice said, did Jesus ask the disciples to flip over any tables? I was like, not really. And his voice said, well, what did Jesus ask the disciples to do? Love your neighbor as yourself, pray for your enemies. These are the things that Jesus asked. Why are you so focused and why are you so hung up on doing something that Jesus did but never asked you to do? And why are you so quick to pump the brakes on doing the things that Jesus asked you to do, which is to love? And it really like made me think, and I was like, man, that's like so true that I've latched on to this one story of Jesus that gives me the license to be divisive, gives me the license to be angry, gives me the license to be mad. And I've been so quick to let that overshadow those other verses where Jesus says, love people, love your neighbor as yourself, pray for your enemies. Like there's pages and pages and pages of those stories. And there's just one story of this one thing. And I felt like Jesus said, or God said, maybe the point of that story isn't that you need to flip tables, but stop trying to sit at the tables that I've already flipped. And if you think about that particular table, right, like it represented division between God and man, because at the table there were the sale of the animals for sacrifice and things like that, and Jesus flipped that over. You don't need to get something in order to get into the presence of God. And so, what are you doing? How many times in your life are you living where you're making people do something to get into the presence of God, believe like you, think like you, whatever? And that just again sent me a whole nother, layer of deconstruction because I feel like that's what we do. We want God to be like us instead of us trying to be like God.
Yeah. Yeah, so much of institutional religion is external focus, is external agency, external power, external validation.
Yeah.
I call it carrot on a stick. And you're always chasing, chasing. You can never get to that thing. And when you think you're right up on it, then the goalpost moves a little bit more and you're constantly chasing, chasing, and you never get there. And I think of the invitation, come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. And when we allow ourselves to maybe slow down the doing enough to rest, um, inside of deep rest is the place where that union, that source is revealed. And that might look like different things to different people: yoga, meditation, a
Mhm.
hike, mindful walking, contemplative, centering prayer, some kind of contemplative prayer practice or whatever. But I think in those moments of deep vulnerability, we really can see the meta narrative. And I would call it a new cosmology, even that shows Jesus not just in a narrow focus of cherry picking the images about Jesus that we want to hold, but really the way of Jesus and how even in just a little bit that we have through the pages, we see we see wholeness, we see love, we see invitations of, like you said, mercy and compassion, vulnerability. It's a different mindset than how we hold up these images that essentially just validate the way that we want to be in the world,
That's right.
you know. Um,
We like to make God in our image, right? As opposed to the other way,
yes.
the other way around.
Instead of the other way. Absolutely.
Do you have time
Absolutely.
for one more question?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so last question for you is, can you speak to the person who's listening to this conversation and maybe they're um, a more progressive leaning person and they've heard that voice inside saying, this either or thing isn't working. There's got to be a different way. And where can somebody begin having these kind of conversations? Because so often I was thinking about this today, like I wanted to ask you, what's it look like to reach across the table, to talk to people who are sitting at the table but on the other side of the table? Then I thought to myself, well, what is it like to have a conversation with the people on your side of the table? Because so often, like we said, it's difficult to when people at the table are demanding the table to be exclusive in some way, we don't want those people sitting here. We don't want to have conversations about this because those people are bad. And it's so hard. And I feel like the media, especially in social media, is like a firestorm. And I feel like every time I turn on Facebook or whatever, there's another problem with another nightmare, with another fire raging somewhere. Something's going on that, is fueling people's emotions. And having these kinds of conversations about love and compassion, it just feels like people just don't want to hear it. And so, what are some ways that you found helpful to begin having these conversations in our more immediate circles that we've been involved in where people are just more in tune with the exclusiveness as opposed to the inclusive conversation? I don't even know if I'm asking it right, but I have a, you're nodding, so I feel like you know
No,
where I'm
no,
going.
you're asking right. I appreciate the frame. My pause is I think one that um Saint Francis of Assisi once said, if you're going to speak peace with the mouth, make sure you have peace in your heart.
Mhm.
And I think that we can't begin a conversation without having done interior work to hold space and capacity for difference and for that. And so my first pause is I have to check in with my own self to really understand my why. What's on my seat of motivation that's driving me to even have this conversation? Am I having it because I'm curious about the person and I want to understand? Am I having it because I want to change their mind? Am I coming to this with an agenda? And anytime I come with an agenda already, that person is an object, right? So I come with the wrong thing. Um, so for me, I I don't think I'm necessarily seeking out conversation because I realize that I can't change someone's mind. But in the event that I may have a conversation, I want to be I want to bear witness to their journey, not what they're hearing on Fox News, but tell me about your experiences in your life. What in your life have you personally experienced? Your story that brings you to this point of view, that brings you to this perspective and this, that share your stories with me, right? I want to listen to understand, not listen to influence, not listen to change, not listen to correct. We listen to understand. And Thich Nhat Hanh was a Buddhist monk, says that compassionate listening is the thing that will transform us. That anytime we listen with compassion, we are changed by that interaction. Why? Because I see a part of you. Valerie Kaur, who is a Sikh activist and civil rights lawyer, she uses the phrase, "You are a part of me that I do not yet know." And so when I come to the table, open-hearted, open hands, no agenda, nothing but to receive your story, I receive the part of myself that I don't yet know because I'm starting from kinship and from connection, not correction,
Mhm.
right? And so that's a long journey to be able to listen to someone's story. And I will share very honest. I have a friend. She and I have been friends for a couple decades, and she was sharing something that she'd had in conversation with her husband that I disagree with. And I knew that the premise of what she was sharing with me came from disinformation. And my face tells everything. So I grimaced and I grimaced before I could catch it. And I didn't correct it. I didn't correct it. I allowed her because in the sharing, she was telling me something about a relational exchange with another person that involved this. And for me to miss the heart of what she was offering me in that moment, to go to the disinformation and try to correct it and fix it, would have missed the intent of our relational connection, right? But in my interior world, from the moment that that conversation ended, I was stewing. Should I have said something? Oh my gosh, now she's going to believe I need to fix that. I need to make it right. Oh dear God, that's one thing. That's just the beginning. Now that could open the door for her to, you know, get sucked into all these different conspiracy theories, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
blah. My head wouldn't stop for three, I'm doing four. It probably was 4 days, but for 3 days, my head was spinning on, gosh, should I have said something? And finally, I had to drop below the noise, drop into my heart, drop even deeper, home to myself, home to that place of union, and ask love, love, what is the most loving, compassionate thing I can do, not for my friend, but for myself right now? Because I have picked on the energy of fix it. And what's really happening here? Why do I need to fix this? Why am I fixated on the idea of making her understand that if she gets involved, entrenched in this slippery slope, our world's going to go to hell in a handbasket?
Mhm.
How do I fix this? So as I drop down into myself, what I realized is that I am invested in my emotional attachment to safety and security and the need for my world to be right. And I needed to fix it because this was my friend, and I don't have a lot of them. And if she goes the way of conspiracy theory, will I lose my friend? And I was worried about what this might cost me. And so that activated my fixer part. But all my parts are sacred and
Mhm.
all my parts are welcome. And so, in that space of getting quiet enough to really hear what's going on with me, because I can only manage me.
Mhm.
So, now that I have this really good information with me, I could sit with a fixer that wanted to make it right and make it better and ask my own self, what's your deepest fear? What's your longing? How do we tend this wound? How do we bring ourselves back into harmony? So
Mhm.
I'm not jumping over in the listening exercise to try to fix and correct and control and manipulate and get my own way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a journey.
Wow.
That's a journey, right?
Wow.
Like that starts with some interior work.
Yeah.
And I think we get stuck here in our noise and we don't drop down and do the interior work that allows us to hold love's energy in a way that can trust the thread of love, that can trust and to restore.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't bypass that interior work because I feel like that opened the door to so many different things. Once you become aware of what's going on inside, you become aware that you are not your thoughts. Your true self is separate from the brain. The firing of all the neurons and stuff is
All the
it's that's
neurons.
not you. You
Yeah,
are the core of who you are. Again, going back to that divine spark, your true self is
yeah.
separate from those things. And I liken it. We talked to our daughter about this. We call it the mind table. She was for a long time dealing with a lot of anxiety about like, especially when she went to school and stuff, and she was very nervous, very scared, and a lot of fear, and a lot of sadness about not being home and different things like that. And we said to her, it's you have to picture your mind like it's a table, and then you have at the table you have kind of like the Inside Out movies, the Pixar movies. You have anger and you have sadness and you have fear and you have anxiety and all these different parts of you. But that's what they are. They're parts of you. And the true self is the part of you that is calm, it's cool, it's collected. It's able to manage the emotions. It speaks love, it speaks compassion, it speaks kindness. And it's okay for all those other parts to be at the table. They're not bad. They're just there. But you don't have to let anger or sadness sit at the head of the table. You can tell that part of you to go, you sit over there. You're welcome at the table, but at the head of the table is your true self. And when you become aware of that and you can, realize that, oh, I'm feeling this right now. That's not me. Take a deep breath and kind of separate yourself from it. again, there's great power in that, but to your point, it takes time. And I think that so often, I know for me, like I get into something, I dig into something, like all these books and stuff. I come across your book, and now I got Valerie's book up there. I've got John Powell's book up there. I've got Mirabai Star up there. I got everybody's books up there. I don't know, I can figure this out, you know? And there's this desire, because again, growing up like I did, going to Bible college, seminary, once you figure something out, you want to share it, right? You got to share it out with people. But not everything that you're working on needs to be shared right away, you know, and I feel like there's value in kind of like the Virgin, you know, kind of like Mary. She kept these things to herself. There was this thing that was growing inside of her, and she kept it to herself, and she protected it, and she nurtured it. And I think that for me, and I think a lot of our listeners who are maybe on this journey, there's something new that's birthing in us, and we don't really understand what it is, understand where it came from, don't really know what's going on, but it's something in there. And there's really no need to go share it with everybody. If somebody asks, yeah, you can talk to them, you know, but there's no reason to have to convince anybody. There's no reason to have to argue somebody into, you know, your side of the middle of the table, and I'll pull them up from either side, and you have to be in the middle with me. This is just where I'm at on my journey. This is what I'm exploring. Tell me what you're exploring, and just leave it at that and see where the conversation goes from there. So I find a lot of value in that. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. I use this acronym called LIE to lie still in the presence of love. And it's to learn, to integrate, and to embody. And I think we learn and then we integrate it into us so that it becomes a part of us. And then we embody it and actually live it in the world. And when we can integrate it and embody it, it's communion. It's like bread and wine, and we can break off a piece of ourselves and feed it and offer it to others. But it's not in a forceful way of I'm trying to convince you or make you. This is just who I am. So when you sup at the table of Felicia, what's going to come out of me is love, because love is who I am, right? It's
Mhm.
the thing that I have learned and integrated. And I was in church a long time, and I read the Bible a lot, and I was still very angry and very mean. And it was not until I had really encountered love and experienced love, loving me, the receptivity of love transformed my life. So love is what you're going to get from me, you know. And we all have that. There's something in our song that we sing that is our radiant expression that you break off and feed to one another.
So good. Felicia, I could talk to you all day, but we are out of time. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you so much for your work and your heart. I am so grateful.
Thank you for the conversation, Glenn. It was really an honor and delight. So I appreciate your yes to this.
Thank you. And real quick, where do you want to direct anybody to go anywhere online, to your social media or websites, any place to follow you and your work?
Yeah, my website is feliciamurrell.com, Murrell. And I'm on Facebook at that same name. And then also on Instagram, hello Felicia underscore Murrell. So
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes, and maybe we can do it again.
appreciate it. Thanks so much, Glenn.